Hello, hello. Welcome to another episode of Project GaitWay, where I have another lovely volunteer who has sent me their video of them walking for me to look at and play a little guessing game, not knowing what her injury history is or having ever seen this video before. It's my first time seeing it, just like it's your first time seeing it. We're going to try to guess what this body has been through that may have led, in part, many other factors, but may have led in part to what we're seeing now in her body mechanics. And based on also, she's given me a list of complaints that she's currently experiencing. So we're going to see what we see. All right, so let's take a look at first her standing static posture. And the first thing that jumps out at me is her right arm, and it seems to be sitting at an interesting angle. The first thing that I want to call that angle is a valgus angle, but I'm not sure if that's true. And if you think about a valgus knee, where you'd see the, what I'm looking at here in her arm is just that kind of angle, where here it looks more straight on her left side. Coming back to the idea of a valgus knee, where you'd have something like this, where the knee is pointing more inwards, creating this angle of the leg. But it is an interesting angle that her elbow is at. What it looks like is her humerus is more externally rotated on the right side. And we can't see her left hand here, so I can't really compare what's going on there. I don't know. I need more information about this interesting angle of her elbow. Something's up. We'll come back to that. It also strikes me that there's something very interesting about her right leg. And I don't know if this is a valgus, like I'm seeing in her forearm and upper arm angle, but it almost looks like if you just pretend that her right leg is a block and her lower leg on the right side is a block. So we have these two blocks stacked up on top of each other. It looks like her upper leg block and her lower leg block are stacked like this. So the femur looks like it's more left, and the tibia looks like it's more right. In comparison to her left leg, where things look a little, her building blocks look a little stacked up, more on top of each other. And that leads me to be looking at her pelvis. If I had to pick a side that it looks like her pelvis is more sitting on top of, I would say it looks like her pelvis is more over top of her left leg. And I wonder if that's what I could be seeing here in this, the shifting of her femur to the left, and then her lower leg just kind of staying a little bit over here to the right. We have an interesting right arm and an interesting right leg. It also somewhat looks like her rib cage, again, if that's a building block and her pelvis is a block. It looks as if, to me, her rib cage block is sitting over to the right. I'm not sure if that's just because it looks like her pelvis is to the left. And really her rib cage could be in the middle of her 2 feet. I'm not quite sure. The optical illusion gets me. Or not even optical illusion, my failure to see clearly. It's more like what it is. But I do see this, an exaggerated level. Her shoulders, her right one looks to be more low, and we can see that in her hands as well. Her right hand's a bit lower down. So we either have a scapula that's lower down, or we have a bit of a spine that's side bent to the right, dropping that right shoulder lower. Forgot to tell you the list of things that bothers Ashley. Did I say your name is Ashley? By the way, this is Ashley. We'll see her face shortly. Ashley has on her list of things that bother her, her left knee, interesting, on both sides, her SI joints, her right shoulder normally, but sometimes her left one. And she generally says she feels asymmetrical when she walks, like one leg swings more than the other, or one leg doesn't extend back as far as the other, something like that. Okay. So let's turn her to a side view. Come on, Ashley, turn to the side, for her to settle. Perfect. From the side view, the first thing I become aware of is her head sitting quite far forward. So you have this flexion in her neck. Do you see how it's kind of like a straight line? Now, human beings were designed to have spines with curves. So what we'd ideally like to see, this is a rib cage. Well, it's a bad rib cage. But we'd like to see a neck that has a little bit of a curve in it, not a flat neck like that. And that's what we're seeing with Ashley a bit. It's flat, flexed neck. So when the head is forward, it can tend to pull the mass of the body forward. And that's almost what it looks like here, that I would suspect she has a bit more weight in the front of her feet. Now looking at the angle of her arm, like that, I'm curious to compare that to her arm on the left. I have the sense here, you can see almost her whole upper rib cage and chest, like the left side of her chest, you can kind of see. So it makes me wonder if she has a rotation to the right through her upper body. Let's see, return to the other side. There we go. Yeah, and you can see that from this angle, from her left side view, you can't really see very much of her upper chest. So it does look like she has a bit of a right rotation. And even from this view, it's like you can see a little bit more the right side of her pelvis sticking up from behind. So it almost looks as well like she has a right rotation in her pelvis, which is very interesting. Right rotation ribcage and right rotation pelvis. Now, when we're walking, ideally, this is pelvis and this is ribcage. We'd like to see if ribcage and pelvis, or sorry, if pelvis rotates to the right, we'd see ribcage rotating left. As one arm swings forwards and the opposite leg swings forward. So we'd see that oppositional rotation through the ribcage and the pelvis, giving us articular motion in the spine in the transverse plane. So we can look at that more in motion. Is she rotating through her spine and her pelvis well? Oops, I went back to the beginning. Okay, what I wanted to do was flip back here to look at her arms. Yeah. So what it looks like is this right arm is more externally rotated, but I'm not sure if that is because of the way she's rotated with her spine to the right. Just let's observe what that left arm looks like from the left side view. Well, now I know it's hard to tell, actually. I'm not entirely sure. Let's put her to the front view and see if that gives any further information. Now she's going to walk. See front view. Let me see. I'm sure she showed us a front view in the beginning. Maybe not. Oh, okay. Oh, what was that? Okay. I'm not sure where in the video this is. I'm very disoriented. But let's say this is her standing from the front view. I think she's saying, "Are you filming me?" All right, let's say this is her front view so we can see. Actually, okay, this is interesting about her right shoulder. From this front view, look at the biceps as a reference, and it looks like this one on the left is more externally rotated. I thought before it was the right one, but I may have just been seeing that her whole spine is rotated to the right. But actually this humerus looks to be more internally rotated than the left one. So think about if you have a rib cage rotating to the right and an arm that's rotating to the left. An internal rotation of the right arm means a left rotation of the right arm. And so if you're rotating your rib cage and your arm towards each other, that should generate a bit more of a closed space here at the front of the shoulder, a protraction through the shoulder girdle, through the scapula. And that can lead to a bit of potentially discomfort. She does say that it's usually her right shoulder that bugs her. This shoulder is also hanging lower, so we might see more tension-based discomfort, length discomfort through that side of the neck, but shortness, compression right here. Oh, that was the end of the video. Okay, so some interesting stuff to go off of. Pelvis that appears left. Some interesting stuff with this arm, rib cage, and pelvis that are both rotated to the right. Not sure what this angle of her arm is about, and I'm not sure what's going on here with her right knee, because it's her left knee that she said was bothering her, but to me, I'm looking at her right knee, noticing that doesn't look quite right. And we didn't say much about her feet, but we can see that her right foot's a bit more turned outwards. So we'll have to see what this all looks like in motion. So I don't take Ashley through some footsteps. Okay, so we'll watch in full speed. Look at that pelvis that likes to get left, but not right, in terms of her frontal plane motion. I figure I call it a swoosh to the left. What was that that just flew across the screen? And interestingly, you look at her arms swinging and her rib cage rotating. She does appear to rotate a bit more easily to the right with her rib cage, but not to the left. Right rotation, right, right, right. I don't see an immediate difference in how much her arms are swinging. But it almost does look like she takes a longer step with her right foot forward. And she said she feels an asymmetry in her stride length. So maybe let's watch that one more time. But it looks like as she takes a longer step forward with her right leg, but when she gets to the left, it's less of a step forwards, but her pelvis swooshes to the side a bit more. So we could say maybe she's missing some sagittal plane. I think that's an airplane. Missing some sagittal plane on the left side hip, flexion extension we'll look at, and then maybe missing frontal plane hip motion on the right. Frontal plane meaning adduction, abduction, pelvis shifting, pelvis hiking. What else do we see? Anything else big pop out? Fast speed walk videos. Fast speed gait videos really are the best for finding the big things that jump out that we can then slow down phase by phase. See, so let's do that now. Let's slow it down phase by phase. Better to take steps 1, 2, and swing through the right leg. Here's our mid stance on the left, early swing on the right. And first thing I like to clock is how much it looks like that lower leg is externally rotated. And it looks to have a little bit, as it did when she was standing on it. She appears to have quite a bit of a hike on the left side of her pelvis, which in this phase we'd want her to be pretty level and neutral looking. And you can see that bit of her resting stance, those building blocks that aren't quite stacked up. Pelvis more shifted leftward. So shifted left and hiked left, which would give us a left hip adduction. So if you're me, the next thing you're wondering about is, can her left hip abduct? Does she get out of it? And that's what we're going to look at next. This next phase, when her right leg swings through into heel strike, is where we ought to see her left hip beginning to abduct. It doesn't really look like it does. Looks like her pelvis stays over to the left and still with that hike on the left. However, we do see her leaning to the right through her spine, which is how she was standing at rest. And how much of that rib cage rotation to the right do we see? A little bit is starting to happen. I don't know if she's getting to her full range there, but we'll find out. And if we look at the position her foot lands in, not the most clear, I know. We'll have to see what that looks like. But I do get this sense here as she's landing on her right heel. Again, this angle of her thigh, it looks a little bit like it's slanted inwards and towards the left. Remember this thing? It looks like that's going on here. Let's put her into a pronated foot on the right. Looks like about there. Again, we see this bit of turnout in her foot. She almost has 2 points of contact on the ground on her back leg, so fantastic. That's pretty rare to see that much of a foot down, at least in the videos that I've been getting lately. And she does get some hike in that pelvis. This angle of her leg, I'm going to want to compare that to the other side because this is where a valgus in the leg, in the knee, would be acceptable and wanted. But I have this vibe that it's a little off. It's a little funky. I'll have to compare it to her other side. Now, this is something that I have trouble putting words around, but it's a quality thing. So it's not like I can say, look at the distance between here and notice how this side is higher or something like that. It's very much a qualitative thing. But do you see how when she's landing on her right foot, it almost looks like she's lifting up off the ground? Like instead of, I would describe this not as a sinking down and landing on her right foot, but almost a floating up and off of her right foot. I don't know how better to say that. We'll look at the left side and then I'll see if it's the same kind of thing. There was, I think in episode 6, I don't know, might not have been that one. I said a similar thing where it looked like there wasn't this shock absorption heavy landing in the foot, which is what should happen in the pronation phase, is we have this shock absorbing foot, this shock absorbing knee, and this shock absorbing hip that all flex or dorsiflex, flex, flex. Pronate. So we have these mechanisms that absorb shock, and it doesn't look like she really is doing that. I don't know. Again, it's very qualitative, so you tell me what you see here. I have the sense that she's not really committed onto this leg. Her pelvis doesn't seem to be getting there. So maybe there's some adduction and pelvis shift to the right, missing this right side. Why? When for me, I have something that looks like a body that doesn't get onto one leg frontal plane wise as easily. This prompts me with the question, why is there something that is uncomfortable here or here? Anyway, let's move her along and see what happens in her right mid stance. Just one extra thing as she's getting from pronation to mid stance, it strikes me that the speed that this side of her pelvis hikes up is quite abrupt. So it's hiking and then just kind of, it looks like it goes pretty quickly. We'll compare it to the other side as well. But there's not a lot of give in it, just like pretty clunky. And then here in her mid stance, standing on the right leg, early swing on the left leg, tibia quite a bit more internally rotated compared to on her right side. So if we think about her left knee being the one that's kind of ouchy and having a more straightforward facing tibia, we might be lacking rotation in that. I'd want to ask her what kind of movements bother her knee. Is it when her knee's bending, like going upstairs or lunging or squatting or something like that, changing directions off of it? Because those motions, that bending of the knee does require it to externally rotate. And here we have they call it a knee that's more internally rotated, just based on that tibia position. So I'm wondering if we'll see when she goes to bend that left knee, that there's some mechanics that are a little off. We can still see that she is a bit in that side bend to the right. Her hike on the right side of her pelvis isn't as dramatic as on the left side of her pelvis. She looks to be quite a bit over top of her left leg in that left stance, and compare again how much external rotation her right tibia has compared to here. Quite a bit different. Let's watch her swing her left leg into heel strike. Yeah, that is a shorter stride. At least in my mind, it looks like this is a bit longer of a step. And this looks a bit shorter. But look at what appears to be a shift to the right. However, that also could be an exaggerated rotation to the right with her pelvis, or a little bit of both. She has a lot more of that going on. If you recall this swing through with her right leg and look at how much her pelvis does or does not travel to the right. Not so much. And then here, pelvis is staying flat. So what's keeping her from getting her pelvis to the right? That's my main question right now. Okay. I'm going to back up a little bit and look at her right heel strike again. Okay. Let's go through her pronation. Ooh. I'm saying ooh because it looks like she lands quite quickly into that pronation. I know we're getting a bit grainy with the video now, zooming like that, but that's okay. So the speed on this left side that she pronates at, if you watch how fast her foot gets on the ground and gets into full pronation, quite a bit faster than on her right side. Also watch her hip, her pelvis, and watch how quickly her pelvis hikes. But the quality of it is different. So do you remember how on the right side I said it looked a bit of an abrupt, not a sinky kind of phase here? And look at how the speed of her right foot as it pronates. It goes a bit slower, and it doesn't actually pronate, does it? It's turned out, but it doesn't look like there's any motion through her foot. It just lands on the ground. And it's a bit more jarring through that leg. However, so when we get to her left side, that foot pronates really fast. I think it actually is, at least from this view, the weight of her foot looks to be more on the inside, so it looks like a more inverted rear foot, whereas her other foot did not look like it really got pressure onto the medial calcaneus. But there, and her knee, and it was kind of grainy, isolated, but it looks like her knee flexes pretty quickly as well. I'm going to get to why that's significant. Look at her on this side and just see if you can get a sense of how much it bends. It doesn't look to me like it actually flexes as it's hard to see from a back view. It'd be easier to see from a side view or maybe even a front view. But her left knee looks like it, I don't know, it just looks to me like it bends a bit more. I could be totally wrong about that. It's not seeing clearly from this angle. But to me, it looks as if she does sink more in that hip, the left side. Like it's more gooey. Like it's more of a tissue, like, I'm getting on my left hip. But on the right side, it's more like a clunk. You see what I mean? I don't know how better to describe that other than with some sound effects. Like, bleep and I don't know. I'm gonna listen back to this. Super embarrassed. Just kidding. I'm not even gonna listen back to this probably. I can never bear to listen to myself talking after recording a thing. So, but hopefully you have a sense of what I mean. There's more general motion, hip, knee, and ankle on this side, and more total pelvis mass getting onto her left side. So I think that combination here, foot pronating really fast, even though we have this tibia that's more internally rotated. So that is kind of interesting, because what we expect to see would be that that tibia that's more internally rotated. Well, this is tough to describe, because when we have a tibia that's internally rotating dynamically, that will lead the foot into pronation. However, if a tibia is already internally rotated, then there might not be much range of motion for it to rotate when it lands on the ground, her foot that is. So potentially there's more of this frontal plane eversion of the calcaneus happening. Be really interesting to get hands-on to feel if she does have, what kind of motion is available in her ankle, foot, knee. Okay. The question is, if all she's doing is potentially hiking and shifting to the left and rotating to the right with her pelvis, then what plane of motion is missing? Sagittal plane. So that's her flexion and extension of her left hip. So can she do either of those things? Let's see. Back to the beginning. All right, let's watch from a front. You can see if anything gets clarified for us. Watch for that airplane to go across the screen. Oh my gosh, let's slow it down and see what that thing actually is. Ah, it's an airplane. A cute pink airplane. Amazing. Okay, let's stop her in her right early swing. You can see that tibia pointing out to the side. You can see her looking like she's into that left hip, but torso. We do have the sense, at least I have the sense, that her head is pitched quite forwards. We already saw that from the side view, but that really makes me wonder about the availability of both of her hips to extend well and flex well. With the head so far forward and her mass getting pulled forward, probably into her forefeet, my assumption, which would be interesting to get her input on, is that neither of her hips really extend very well. Think about if your weight's in your forefeet. That should couple together with, well, it could either be an anterior tilted pelvis or a posteriorly tilted pelvis, and I'm not sure which one is not Veronica, actually. I'm not sure what her pelvis is actually doing, but it would limit that motion, anterior, posterior, tilting, flexion, extension of the hips. Anyway, so we have her swinging through. We can just kind of see that tendency for her rib cage to be rotated to the right. And her pelvis looks like it is getting to the left. Then we get to watch how her foot articulates onto the ground. Remember, on the right side here, I suggested that her foot was pronating more slowly, but not actually pronating. You can actually see the speed that it takes, or the time that it takes for her big toe to finally meet the ground. But there, wait for her toes on her front foot to stop moving. It might be there. So it really takes some time for her toes to get on the ground. don't really like the quality of how her knee is bending on the right. It's almost as if here is not happening so well, but we have this body that is getting into the shape for the loading phase of gait. And what that means is you have a rotation right in the rib cage. That's great. Rotation left in the pelvis. That's great. Lateral flexion of the spine to the right. That's great. But down here doesn't look as nice. Okay, let's see. And what's interesting is when it looks like her toes do finally land on the ground, this leg is in early swing when we'd like it to be still on the ground. So that does potentially say this left hip might have trouble extending, a bit of shortness in the hip flexors there. So let's watch as this left leg swings through. That isn't really much of a heel strike, is it? And if you look at her leg on the left, it looks like it's internally rotating as it lands down. And compared to her right side, it doesn't look like it's internally rotating as it lands down. In fact, it doesn't look like it internally rotates at all. Interesting. However, right here, look, it looks as if her leg starts to internally rotate as she begins to swing it through, and it straightens a lot right there. Like, hiya. It kicks forward. Does it do that on the other side? I don't remember. Now it's a bit softer. You can see when her leg swings through, her knee, it's just a little softer there. It's not locked out like a karate kick. And here it's like jump. So she's landing in heel strike with a bit more of a straight knee. And yeah, you want a straight knee when you land in heel strike, but this might be too straight. And if we look at how her foot then proceeds to meet the ground, it looks to be quite turned in. So she's holding a foot shape. What we'd call this is in her forefoot, it looks like she is adducted. Adducted meaning that her forefoot is pointing towards midline, also sometimes referred to as an internal rotation of the forefoot. And this toe as well looks like it's adducted towards midline. Now, some folks would call that an abduction if their reference is the midline of the foot. But in our anatomy and motion speak, we reference the midline of the body. So this big toe is adducting towards midline of her body. And interestingly, those are supination mechanics. However, what we want to see her doing here is entering pronation of her foot, but her foot appears to be blocking pronation from happening here at her toe. Isn't that an interesting toe? So cool. That's a supinated big toe on a pronating rear foot. So what's really interesting to observe here is it's really does a disservice if we generalize a foot shape as pronation or supination, or just inversion or eversion, because what's so cool about Ashley's foot is that from behind we saw that there was this eversion of her rear foot, meaning that the weight's tipping more onto the inside edge. But then we see this super interesting big toe that is adducting. So eversion of the rear foot, that's a pronating rear foot. in the frontal plane. But an adduction of the big toe, that's a supinating big toe in the transverse plane. So when we think about a foot as this triplanar structure, we can have some parts of it supinating, some parts of it pronating in different planes of motion. So the words supination and pronation are almost too simplistic to describe a foot. It's like, what are all of the individual parts doing? And I could see why she might be having some issues with this knee, looking at it in more detail. And it could be that, I mean, I don't know, there's some discombobulations going on. We have this tibia going in, this toe going in. Could that big toe be trying to block her from bending this? Because this knee looks like it bends more flexion. And that's of interest because she has this internally rotated tibia. Now, an internally rotated tibia should show up when the knee extends. But what's this knee doing? It's flexing more. So we have this moment where her knee is here extending a lot, and then it's flexing more. Look at how her knee actually goes into a bend there. However, on the right side, it looks like it doesn't have that smooth quality of bend to it. It's a little more jarred. This one, it actually does bend, I would say farther, but it's not going to be a nice quality because for the knee to bend, tibia needs to externally rotate under the femur. Not that it externally rotates, but the femur goes in and it goes into internal rotation much farther than the tibia goes in, leaving the tibia looking like it's pointing out to the side. Okay, so there's some discombobulation in the transverse plane here. So I really am curious about if anything happened to this ankle or foot. Is that big toe ever a problem? Is that something that you're aware of, that your big toe is different on your right foot? But I also wonder about, left foot. I also wonder about her right foot because it takes so long for her toes to get on the ground. Is she avoiding putting her weight on the inside of her foot because there was something that happened there? For example, I remember, I think it was video episode number 3, we had a gentleman who actually had the inside of his arch cut. Or not that he got it cut, it got cut. He stepped on something, like lacerated the medial arch. So we saw that he was always standing on the outside of his foot. So is there some kind of reason why she's avoiding getting those toes down, just slowing down that motion because pronation, for whatever reason, isn't a happy experience there on the right side? Not sure. That is super interesting. So I guess the question I have, I hesitate to make any guesses about injury history because I really actually don't have anything coming to mind other than, did something happen here? Or is that a result of adaptation because something happened here on the right side and now her body is shifting out of it and spending more time on her left leg? But maybe now that she's spending more time on her left leg, there's been some discombobulation of the mechanics down in that left leg as well. I'm not sure. Actually, I'm not super clear, but I'd love to hear. I'm super curious now. As well with the bilateral SI joint, I wonder how much of that is to do with the head being forward and the hips not looking like either of them can really extend. Let me show you what I mean by that. So here we would have an extension in her left hip, in theory. But what it looks like to me is she's rotating her pelvis a bit too much for that to be a really clean extension. And you can even see here that it looks like her leg is internally rotated. her left femur looks like it's internally rotated. So that's not going to set her up to extend her hip very well. So I don't know if that hip can extend. And if we look at her extension on her right hip, so it also looks to me like this hip doesn't extend, but it's a bit different in that here her knee is more bent, and that bending of her knee is not going to allow her knee to extend fully. If this knee were to extend, that would give her a better chance of extending her hip. Also, just the stance that she had in the beginning with her weight a bit more forward into her forefeet, her head a bit more forward, it makes me wonder how well she'll be able to do a pelvis anterior and posterior tilt. So can she move her pelvis and hips in the sagittal plane? And could that be contributing to the SI joint stuffed bilaterally? But it is more one side than the other, she says. So interesting stuff. So my questions I leave you with is, what's preventing you from getting good quality shock absorption through this right leg? Injury history on the right leg of any sort? And I just would love to, the problem solving part of me just really wants to grab that foot and leg and feel it in my hands because it looks like it's so interesting, like organized. Didn't really talk much about her upper body, but she does, that wasn't a good step. Whoop, plane. She does look to have that persistent rotation through her rib cage to the right. Now, I'm not sure if that is something happened to one of her shoulders or something, and now she's stuck rotating to the right, or is that just another way of her getting her body onto her right leg? When the rib cage rotates right in gait, that would be coupled with the body moving its weight forwards into the right leg. So sometimes when we have people that struggle to access mechanics of one leg, meaning like Ashley, for example, like she's not really adducting her right hip. She's not really getting her pelvis to shift over her right leg. She's not really bending her knee very well, or I'm not really sure if she's flexing her hip very well on either side. So there might be this strategy of rib cage rotating to the right in order to get her body onto that leg in some way, shape, or form. Same thing with that right lateral flexion of the spine. So these are things to understand, or these are things that I want to understand. One of my colleagues often reminds me, you don't need to understand. The story doesn't need to make sense. All that's really necessary is to see what's there and begin to reorganize things and follow the breadcrumbs. Follow the breadcrumbs, meaning put a new input into this part of the body, give back what it's missing and see how it changes, and then go from there. But I just love pondering the how and the why things got this way. So Ashley, could you please fill us in on the how and the why? What happened with your body? Anything of interest in your history? Wondering also about head injuries, whiplash, with that head forward pop position that's quite common. So tell us about that. Write into the comments if you would. Greatly appreciated. Thanks again for letting us watch your video. And anyone else watching, I appreciate your feedback as well. Any questions, observations, thoughts, speculations, pop them into the comments as well. Thanks for tuning in. The three of you who actually watched this all the way through, you're my peeps. And I look forward to the next video in Project GaitWay. Until then, have a great day.